Thank you for joining us this evening for another lecture in the series Perspectives on Economic Liberty, hosted by Arizona State University's Center for the Study of Economic Liberty, and tonight sponsored by Young America's Foundation. My name is Ross Emmett. I'm a professor of economic thought in the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership, and the director of the Center for the Study of Economic Liberty. The Perspectives lecture series that this event is part of emerges from the center's mission, which is to evaluate the contribution of economic liberty to human betterment. One of the ways to pursue that mission is to invite a variety of guests who will interrogate aspects of economic liberty, evaluate its role in human betterment, revisit important debates, and also consider its relation to other values and freedoms that we may possess. Our guest this evening is Arthur B. Laffer, who is the founder and chairman of Laffer Associates, an economic research and consulting firm. Dr. Laffer's economic acumen and influence in triggering a worldwide tax-cutting movement in the 1980s have earned him the distinction in many publications as the father of supply-side economics. One of his earliest successes in shaping public policy was his involvement in the Proposition 13, the groundbreaking California initiative that drastically cut property taxes in the state in 1978. Dr. Laffer was a member of President Reagan's Economic Policy Advisory Board for both of his two terms, from 1981 to 1989. He was a member also of the Executive Committee of the Reagan-Bush Finance Committee in 1984, and was a founding member of the Reagan Executive Advisory Committee for the presidential race of 1980. In 2019, Dr. Laffer was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Donald Trump. Dr. Laffer has authored over 20 books, including the New York Times bestseller, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of States, and Taxes Have Consequences, an income tax history of the United States, released by Post Hill Press in September 2022. Dr. Arthur Laffer's visit to ASU is sponsored by Young America's Foundation, a national youth organization whose mission is to ensure that increasing numbers of young people across the country are inspired by the ideas of individual freedom, free enterprise, traditional values, and a strong national defense. Today's lecture is part of YAF's William F. Buckley Lecture Series. In addition to sponsoring campus programs like this one, Young America's Foundation organizes student chapters at colleges and high schools, holds student conferences, and preserves the Reagan Ranch in California and Ronald Reagan Boyhood Home in Illinois as historic precedential properties for young people to learn about America's 40th president. To learn more about those, you can visit yaf.org. Our format tonight is Dr. Laffer's presentation will be followed by a Q&A. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker, Dr. Arthur Laffer, to Arizona State University.
Wasn't that just lovely? Golly gee. I one time said that I just wish my mom and dad were still alive and could have heard it, the introduction. My dad would have been very, very proud, and my mom would have actually believed it. But can I have some fun with you tonight? First place, I do want to say thank you, YAF, thank you, ASU. It is great to be here. It's loads of fun. I have a little bit of a history in Arizona. It goes back a long way, but very thin, if you know what I mean. Wide, but not very deep. I lived here in Arizona during the war, in Tucson at the Pioneer Hotel. I lived with my grandparents. My father was on War Production Board. So I was here as a 5-year-old during the war. And so when the troops came from Europe, all the way to fight in the east. They'd come through Tucson there, if you know the big graveyard of all the planes there, if any of you have seen that. They'd go through there, and I was their kid brother or their oldest son or whatever it was, so they'd always take me out and get fig juice, and it was just wonderful. Great. And then I had a lovely stint here in Arizona with a guy named Fife Symington, who was one of my dearest friends. He was your governor. We had eliminated the income tax in Arizona. But to do that, I had the plan for Fife that we were going to do it 1/8 of getting rid of 1/8 of the income tax every year for 8 years. And it was perfect. We had 5 years under our belt. Everything, we dropped the highest rate from 8%, which came in under Babbitt, Meek, and Mulford. You remember them? And then they had it way up there. And then we dropped it down to 4%, and we gotten the lowest rates out. We were just ready to close the deal. We'd just beaten Eddie Basha in the race for the second term. And then the feds came in and indicted Fife, convicted him, threw him out. We lost. We never got that last little bit. But so I've had a lot of history here in Arizona and just love it. And a lot of history with YAF, by the way. YAF is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful organization. And I do a lot of work with them, and I'm just really pleased. And if you don't mind, I'm going to have a little fun with you tonight. Is that all right? Do I have to be stiff and pretend oh, yes, quite. I'm going to be very serious. It is going to be serious. The topics are deadly serious. But there's no reason why you can't have a little fun with them as well, if that's okay with you. I got off the plane this morning from Nashville, Tennessee. You'll hear me cough a little bit tonight, and forgive me on that. But it's been chilly in Nashville, rainy, drizzly. We had snow a week and a half ago, and I was so looking forward to coming to Phoenix and the bright sun and the warm air, and it was worse than Nashville. And, I got off, and I asked the pilot, I said, "Excuse me, did I make a mistake? Did I land in Anchorage, Alaska? I mean, what is going on here?" And it was, by the way, it did remind me of Alaska and got this chill. Have any of you ever been to Alaska? Any of you have? You have? Have you ever been the Iditarod race or any of that stuff? I have this story about Alaska, which pertains to the economy, if I can, and I'll sort of tell you this story and relate it there. I heard this story about this guy who was in Alaska, and he was wandering out in the outback of Alaska, and this little town had dirt road, wooden buildings there, and he went in there, and he went in this wooden building, the doors go, and it was a bar, and he gets in there, and he goes up to the bar, and there's this sign on the bar which read, "Tough guys drink free." Well, he saw that, so he looked over at the bartender. He said, "Excuse me, would you mind telling me what you think a tough guy is?" And the bartender said, "Stop right there. You tell me your story, and then I'll tell you whether you're a tough guy or not." He said, okay, if those are the rules, I'll play by the rules. He said, my story began, I was in the Iditarod race. I had my dog sled, my team, and we were at the Iditarod race. Some of you may know this is a long race across Alaska on dog sled. And he said, we got started, the gun fired, we started off, and I took off like a bat out of hell. I was going really fast. I went way up the ridge. I was leaving all the other sleds behind me. I came up over this ridge going really amazingly fast, and there was this huge Kodiak bear. The Kodiak bear came down. It killed my lead dog. It came down. It ripped my right arm off my body. My right arm fell in a snowdrift. I sat there with this Kodiak bear. I reached in my backpack with my left arm. My right arm was in some snowdrift over there. I pulled my Swiss Army knife out of my backpack. I opened it up with my teeth because I didn't have another hand to open it with. And I fought that Kodiak bear for about 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, long time. And finally, I killed the Kodiak bear. And I went back to the sled, and I looked in the snow. I searched all over the snow, and I finally found my right arm. And so I stuck my right arm in a snowbank. I leaned against it. I reached back again into my backpack. I pulled out an extra shoelace I had for the journey. And with my Swiss Army knife and my shoelace, I sewed the right arm back onto my body. Closed the Swiss Army knife, put it back in my backpack. I got back on my dog sled, Sans lead's dog. Now, this lead dog was dead, and I went and I finished the race, and I ended up 4 hours behind the lead sled. the bartender said, you know, Mister, that is the most amazing story I have ever heard. I mean, it is incredible. Sir, you are a tough guy and you drink free. And he goes, all right. I just want to see how the audience is prepared for tonight. Oh my God. It's a little slow, but we'll let you go on that. Well, let me, if I can, what I want to do is we've had a huge change in the U.S. very recently. And I want to take you through sort of how I assess this change. And I'm an economist, just so you know, I'm an economist and I'm only an economist. You know, I don't talk about social issues. I don't talk about all sorts of issues, but I am an economist and I talk about economics. And when I look at what's going on in the U.S. economy today, I look at a framework. And the framework I sort of envisage in my mind's eye to assess the economy is I look at the five grand kingdoms of macroeconomics. Now, if you take a macroeconomics textbook and you sort of imagine that textbook, what are the big sections in that textbook? Now, the first section you'll find, at least in the ones I look at, would be taxation. That's really a big economic topic. The second one is government spending. That's another huge topic there. The third major section there would be monetary policy or sound money or inflation. I don't care what the name is, you look at it. The fourth one would be regulations because they're huge there and you know all the regulatory stuff that goes on. And the fifth category is international trade. And we have a short time tonight together, so I can go over and skip over a couple of them really quickly. I want to spend some good time with you, if I may, on taxation and on international trade. Monetary policy is there. So is regulatory policy, so is government spending, but I'm going to spend most of my time on taxation and on international trade. And I want to put the current political environment into context. A dear friend of mine who was very involved with Reagan was a guy named Marty Anderson, one of my dearest friends ever. And Marty Anderson always talked about the 7 positions of political power. And if you look at today's political environment, you've got to hearken back to the 7 positions of political power because it has been a long, long, long time since any type of concentration like we see today has occurred in the 7 positions of political power. And let me, if I can, go through these 7 positions because this is the wherewithal. This is sort of where the rubber hits the road and where policies are going to really be put into place. The first position of political power is obviously the presidency of the United States. And you've got a very strong personality president, as you probably have come to realize. But not only is he a strong personality, but Donald Trump was elected by a majority of the voters in America, as well as by an electoral victory, quite substantial electoral victory as well. If you look at all the swing states, he won every single one of them. So in some ways, this is a very substantial victory for Donald Trump and for the Republicans on the first position of political power. All of you with me on this? The second position of political power, which is also quite narrow in the number of people, it's called the most exclusive club in America. It's called the U.S. Senate, if you want to call it that. Prior to the election, the Democrats had a control over the U.S. Senate, 51-49. The Senate leader was Chuck Schumer. The minority leader was Mitch McConnell from Kentucky. During the election, there was an election move that down ticket moved very Republican as well. The Republicans picked up 4 seats in the Senate. Democrats obviously lost 4 seats in the Senate. The Republicans now have control of the Senate 53-47, which is a very, very large position of political power for the Republicans. So presidency and for the Senate. Then the third position of political power, the Republicans have a very, very skimpy, tiny majority. It's in the U.S. House. I think they have a 2-seat majority in the U.S. House. But they do have a majority in the U.S. House, although it's very skimpy. They do have it. So if you look at the first three positions of political power, presidency, Senate, and House, it's a trifecta. Now you go to some non-directly politically elected positions that are in the 7 positions of political power. The first one is the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court, if you look at that, we have 9 members of the U.S. Supreme Court, 6 of whom have been appointed by Republicans. And I think it would be fair to say, at least on economic issues, that this is a very lopsided Supreme Court towards free markets, towards Republican ideals, very much so on the Supreme Court position, 6-3, I would put it, which is a very large majority for the Republican appointees in U.S. history. It's really quite amazing. The 5th position of political power is controlled by a Democrat. It's the Federal Reserve Board, and here is a person who's extraordinarily powerful, Jerome Powell, and all of the Federal Reserve Board members. It is controlled by Powell, who I would call sort of leaning Democratic, leaning liberal on that line. The board is. But do remember that in a year from now, the chairmanship of the Federal Reserve Board will switch hands. Donald Trump will get his chance to name the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. So there's a good chance that it will flip into the Republican rank within the next year and a half or so when the new chairman takes place. Now we have 2 additional positions of political power that are also extremely important. They are the governors of the states of the United States, and they are the state legislatures of the states of the United States. So the last 2, that's 6 and 7. In the governors, the Republicans have a very substantial majority of the governors of the states of the United States, and the Republicans have a very strong leadership majority in the state legislatures. It's quite substantial. So when you look at these 7 positions of political power, what you're seeing really here is a very heavy concentration towards Republicans, which means that there's a good chance that things can actually be implemented and put into place at the state level and at the federal level. And I just want to put that as a background for discussing the economics itself. Now, when I look at the Trump administration through the lens of the 5 major kingdoms of macroeconomics, and let me, if I can, I'm going to refer back to the first term when Trump was in office and look at what he did there. And if you look at the first term, and again, please remember, I'm an economist. I'm not on any other issues. It's just economics is what I care about, and that's what I do. That's what I do, and that's it. The first thing I would point out in the first term that Trump pushed through and he got it through on the last day. I mean, a Hail Mary shot, but he did, which was called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. This was his probably signature piece of legislation. It passed by 1 vote. 1 vote. It was 1 vote in the Senate. What it did was it took the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. It put through 100% expensing of capital purchases in there. It cut the personal income tax rate from 39.6% to 37%. And the other major economic aspect of this Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was it cut the capital gains tax rate quite dramatically through exemptions and exclusions. So there was a very large reduction in the capital gains taxes in that. So those 4 features were the 4, what I consider their major features of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. If you look at what the results were of that, the U.S. economy, prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was in the 4th quarter of 2017, it was passed in the 4th quarter. So, the U.S. economy had been mapping out, mirroring the European economy quarter by quarter, just right together, one a little bit up, a little down. But the 2 moved right together once the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed. The U.S. economy started growing a lot faster than the European economy. After 2 years of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the U.S. economy was 2.5% higher. The U.S. GDP was 2.5% higher than it would have been had it grown at the European growth rate. So it was a very major stimulus to the U.S. economy, and that's from the 4th quarter of 2017 to through the 3rd quarter of 2019 before the pandemic hit. So That's the Tax Cut Job Act. On some of the other healthcare things, President Trump put in an executive order on medical transparency, which is that all medical providers are required to post their prices and the information they have about the quality of healthcare, of the healthcare procedures they're doing, so that people get to choose. They know what the prices are. They know what the outcomes expected are supposed to be. They can do this. I think this is going to be a big deal in this next term. But healthcare transparency is a huge, huge deal that he did do an executive order on, but never really implemented because the fees and fines for disobeying the order were very, very small. In the same vein, he did right to try. Do any of you remember right to try? If you have a terminal disease and you're going to die you have a right to try any medicine you want, whether it's FDA approved or not. The Democrats voted against this almost in unison, but there were about 5 or 6 Democrats, including a wonderful, wonderful person named Jared Polis of Colorado, who's the governor of Colorado now. He voted in favor of that. Trump was able to get the right to try to pass, that people could try whatever they wanted if they have a terminal disease. If you look at his healthcare one on warp speed, in February, March of 2020, COVID-19 burst on the scene. Trump immediately got deregulation of all of the healthcare industries and the approval ratings, and he put in a lot of money. I think he put in something like $2.5 or $3 trillion into trying to find a COVID-19 vaccination. During that period of the rest of 2020, the estimates were that to get approval for a vaccine would take about 5, 6, 7, 8 years to get it fully through and tested and tried. He was able to get an effective vaccine approved in December of 2020, which was one of the most amazing things ever. Virtually, I was one of the first people to get that. I'm not saying it should go to kindergarten people or young people on that, but for old coots like me are in huge high-risk categories, I was really pleased to be able to get that. I think that's an enormous accomplishment of his administration. I think also, if you look at what happened on inflation, I think, again, Trump during the first term was much lower inflation than the next term. I won't go much more into that. On energy, he was energy decontrol in his first term. I think during that first term, there was a point we finally came to where the U.S. was energy independent, which is pretty amazing. The last thing I want to mention on the first term, just as his accomplishments and what happened, is the Supreme Court. And I'm not talking about all the issues that caused all the kerfluffle and all the brouhaha. I'm talking about the Chevron decision and some of these, just plain economics, that in order for a group to be able to regulate and to put in rules and regulations that you have to follow as if they were the law, they must be passed by Congress and signed into law by the president. This was a huge rollback of the executive power of departments and agencies in putting in mandatory regulations that, in fact, do not have congressional and presidential authority there. It's just quite an impressive thing there. Lastly, on what he did in his first term, just to reiterate and cover it with you, on the first term, Donald Trump also did some very major trade legislation. And I'm going to come back to you in this going forward, because 2 topics I really want to cover a lot on are taxes and trade. But we had 5 major trade deals done in Donald Trump's first term. The first one you all know about was USMCA, where he did NAFTA. He reorganized NAFTA. And in my opinion, his reorganization of NAFTA, the USMCA, was a significant freeing of trade, a lowering of tariffs, not increasing, even though he threatened and yelled about tariffs, and I'm the tariff man and all that. When the actual deed was done, the tariffs were lowered on the North American Free Trade Agreement. I found that quite an exceptional, good piece of legislation. As a professor of economics and basically trade economics, I was very pleased with that piece of legislation. I also looked at what the legislation was with respect to Japan. What he did with Japan, we had a free trade agreement with Japan, and again, threats were all over the place, screams and hollers and all this, and press reports and all that. But when it came down to the final piece of legislation, final treaty, it was a reduction in tariffs on the part of Japan and the U.S. on their trade. It was much freer trade, not less free trade. That was the actual deed that was done, as opposed to what the talk was. And I always like to look at what happens, not what's talked about. There was another one with South Korea, which again ended up being more free trade and a reduction of trade barriers rather than an increase in trade barriers. There was also one done with Bolsonaro in Brazil, if any of you remember that, and Paulo Guedes, the whole team down there, that was a freer trade deal with Brazil than had previously existed. And I think the other one was with Colombia or Bolivia. I'm not sure. Maybe it was Bolivia. But when you look at all the trade deals he did in his first term, they were all pro-free trade reductions. And I've got a little story to tell you about him and a conversation I had with him on trade a little later. So when I look at the U.S. economy today, I see the positions of political power, and I see what he did in his first term. And let me, if I can, go through the ones I'm really thinking about right now. And, you know, I'm going to talk about taxes because I'm not sure what the legislation is going to be, but I do think I have a good, clear insight into what the policy initiatives are going to try to entail and encompass. If you go out to the freeway out here, you can see cops all around the place. Arizona's just full of cops in cold weather. And if you go out there and look at them, I mean, we tax speeders. Why do we tax speeders? To get them to slow down. We tax speeders to get them not to speed, to reduce the amount of speed. You tax speeders to get them to speed less. Why do we tax cigarettes? To get people to stop smoking. All right? We tax speeders to get them to stop speeding. We tax smokers to get them to stop smoking. Why then do we tax people who earn income? Why do we tax people who employ other people? Why do we tax businesses that make phenomenal products at very low cost and eschew the use of lawyers and accountants and report gobs and gobs of profits? Why do we tax them? Now, the truth is we do not tax incomes to get people to earn less. We don't. We tax it to get the revenues to run government. We don't tax people who employ other people to get them to stop employing other people. We don't. We get it to raise the revenues to run government. We don't tax businesses that make wonderful products at low cost and make lots of profits to get them to stop making wonderful products and stop doing it at a high cost and to hire lawyers. We don't do that. All right? We do it to collect the revenues to run good government. But what I want to say to you is, don't you think for 1 second that the same consequences don't occur when you tax income earners, when you tax people who employ other people, and when you tax companies that make wonderful products at low cost. That happens when you the same thing happens as when you tax people. When you tax something, you get less of it, period. And when you look at the tax situation today, I want to cover two issues on taxes that are really important on that. And one of the ones is an outgrowth of my book called Taxes Have Consequences. I wrote this book with two colleagues who are just spectacular, Dr. Brian Dimitrovic and also Dr. Gene Sinkfield. And it's a culmination of probably 40, 45 years of my work. What this book does is it looks at the entire history of the U.S. income tax from 1913 to the present. You follow me here? It's the whole 110-year or 111-year history of the U.S. income tax. Let me just say this about that, is we have every single tax return that has ever been filed in the U.S. We don't have the names of the people who filed them. That's confidential. But we know every tax return. We know how much they made, how much they paid in tax, what their deductions were, blah, 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 everything. For every year, for the whole history of this. We do not have a paucity of data. This is not a sampling property. This is literally a comprehensive look at all of this. Now, what we did was we took all those tax returns, and we wanted to put this into a context of today's political environment. And we looked at it from the metric of what happened to the top 1% of income earners in the U.S. Excuse me for coughing, but we looked at it there. It starts off in 1913. Was that, the 16th Amendment to the United States Constitution was passed, which allowed the income tax to be in place. Within 3 or 4 months, bam, they put an income tax in 1913. All right, they put it in. The first income tax applied for only November and December, just 2 months in 1913. We only had required 358,000 people to file taxes, that's all, out of 62 million adults in America at that time. Less than 0.5%, little teeny tiny sliver of people were required to file income taxes. And the progressive income tax during that little sliver of people went from 0% to 7% was the highest tax rate. That tax stayed for 1913, 1914, and 1915. No change whatsoever, although in the latter 2 years, it included all 12 months. And then pop, the jack of the ball popped out, and it went straight up. By 1918, the highest marginal income tax rate had gone from 7% to 77%. You ready? The number of people required to file went from 358,000 to 6.5 million. The game was on. The race, Woodrow Wilson, now he argued that we needed that badly because we had a pandemic, and they did. And we had World War I, which we did. They needed that badly, he said. So when the war was won, the pandemic left, he said, America, thank you for helping us so much solve these problems. And I just want to make sure you know how much we appreciate you. So we're going to cut your income tax rate, the highest rate, down from 77% to 73%. You're welcome. The race in 1920 was on literally the 73% tax rate. Harding and Coolidge versus Cox and Roosevelt. That was the race. Cox was the sitting governor of my home state, Ohio. And Roosevelt was the undersecretary of the Navy, a guy named Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You'll hear his name later. He was there. They ran against Harding and Coolidge. Harding and Coolidge won by the largest percentage ever, promising to lower tax rates back. They called it a return to normalcy. And they reduced tax rates dramatically through that period. They brought them down from 77% to 25%. Is that a good enough cut for you on the top 1%? Now, this is all the top 1%. Then they mowed it down to 1 more percent, 24% at the end. Bang. Then we had the Smoot-Hawley tariff of 1930, which crashed the market. Herbert Hoover, then raised the highest tax rate in 1932 from 25%. He raised it to 63%. He raised anything that swam, he taxed it. If it floated, he taxed it. If it crawled, he taxed it. If it dug holes, he taxed it. If it flew, he taxed it. He raised the highest tax rate from 25% to 63%, narrowed all the brackets, raised the lowest rates, boom. Game was on. Again, Roosevelt beat him, took over office. We had a wealth tax on gold. Then Roosevelt raised the highest tax rate in 37 to 79%. Then he raised it finally in 1944 to 94% was the highest marginal income tax rate. Then it dropped a little bit afterward. We have a huge history of taxes. We have lots of variation. We have tons of data. We have every single tax return. Let me tell you what comes out of this. Mr. Saez, Mr. Piketty, Mr. French Piketty, who writes about this, Mr. Zuckman, Sancheva, all the wonderful redistributionists at MIT and at Harvard and at Yale. We use their data from the Center for Income Inequality. We use their data. They are really good on the data. We use their data. Let me tell you what happens. Every single time we raise the highest marginal income tax rate in the top 1% of income earners, every single time, the economy has underperformed. Every single time we have raised the highest marginal income tax rate in the top 1% of income earners, tax revenues from the top 1% have gone down, not up. They discovered lawyers, accountants, deferred income specialists, favor grabbers, lobbyists, you name it, they found it. They can buy every politician there ever was. All right? Tax revenues went down when they raised the rate on the top 1%. Think of that in today's context. Number 3, every time we raised the highest marginal income tax rate, the group that was hammered were the poor, the minority, the disenfranchised, those people on the bottom echelon of the economic life. That's the truth. You know, when I think about this topic, what I think about, and let me just say it, I don't give a damn what their opinion is. And you should not give a damn about what my opinion is. This is about facts, not how you feel. These are the facts I'm describing to you, period. And all good economics should be based on facts and facts alone. And I'm just saying that really carefully to you here. Just every time we've lowered tax rates in the rich, the economy has outperformed. The go-go 60s, Kennedy, Reagan, Trump, Harding and Coolidge, through the moon. All the times you've lowered it, it's been depression, wartime, all that stuff. Okay? Every time we've lowered tax rates in the rich, we've had outperformance. Economy has outperformed. Not only does the economy outperform, but tax revenues from the rich have gone way up, not down. And lastly, every time we've lowered tax rates in the rich, the beneficiaries, the primary beneficiaries, have been the lowest echelons of the economic ladder. You remember what it was like in jobs under Reagan and jobs under Kennedy and jobs under Harding and Coolidge. I'm the only one probably in this room who does remember it personally. You're supposed to laugh at that. I'm not that old. Okay? But that's the truth. These are the words. That is what has happened. There. This is where the essence of economics is going to come in this administration and this term. And, when you talk about income inequality, and I want to talk about income inequality because there are all these people with these saws and these slogans and all that stuff. It is true that every time we've raised tax rates on the rich, income inequality has declined. Incomes have become far more equal when you raise tax rates on the rich. But let me tell you how they become more equal, because it's really important. It's not just that they become more equal, it's how they become more equal. And this is where I'm going to take you to the economics of the transfer theorem. And please forgive me for being a little technical with you tonight, but this stuff is serious. And I can joke with you all night, and we will have fun, and I love doing it, and I'll even dance if you want me to, but I want you to get the economics. And this is the transfer theorem. A transfer is whenever you take resources from one person and give it to another person, or from one class of people and give it to another class of people. For example, Social Security takes resources from young people and gives it to old people. Yes. All of these things are all just transfers, that we have in here. Not 90%, but a large share of total federal government is in transfer payments, bailouts, welfare, stimulus spending, all of that. The usual way we talk about transfer payments, however, is that we really take from those who have a little bit more and we give to those who have a little bit less. Are you with me? This is income redistribution. You can see it in the progressive income tax. You can see it in the needs test, means test, and incomes test for welfare recipients, food stamps, etc. I could do it in all sorts of unemployment benefits. You have to be unemployed to get those benefits. All of these are transfers from those who have a little bit more to those who have a little bit less. Okay, let me start with that premise. When you take from those who have a little bit more, you reduce their incentives to produce, and they will produce a little bit less. Clear? I could do it in math, but I'm going to prove the theorem verbally for you because it's a math theorem. It's not left-wing, right-wing, liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, old, young, or any of that stuff. This is just plain math. Whenever you take from those who have a little bit more, you reduce their incentives to produce, and they produce a little bit less. Whenever you give to those who have a little bit less, they all of a sudden have an alternative source of income other than working, and they too will produce a little bit less. So when you take from those who produce a little bit more, who have a little bit more, you reduce their incentives to produce, and they produce a little bit less. When you give to those who have a little bit less, you reduce their incentives to produce, and they too produce a little bit less. The theorem here, and it's just a plain theorem, and I don't give a darn what politicians tell you, whenever you transfer income, whenever you redistribute income, you always reduce total income, period. It's math. I don't care if you're a Harvard professor, Yale professor, Princeton, or MTSU. Okay, I just don't care. Whenever you redistribute income, you always reduce total income. You can see this intuitively. If you tax people who work and you pay people who don't work, am I going way over your heads on this one? People, please help me on that. You're going to get less work. There. That's the theorem. Now, the lemma from this theorem I find pretty intuitive. I'm not going to prove it verbally to you, but I find it pretty intuitive, so I'll just state it to you. The more you transfer, the more you redistribute, the greater will be the reduction in total production, period. So the more you transfer, the greater will be the reduction in total production. Okay, that's the lemma. But now the limit function of this theorem is where I want to get back to really Saez's inequality and of income and all this, is the limit function of this theorem. And God, I wish Bernie Sanders were here tonight, or Elizabeth Warren are here tonight, or AOC for that matter, or anyone, or all these people are there. The limit function of this theorem is, if you were able to redistribute all income so that everyone comes out exactly the same, there will be no income whatsoever. Let me prove this to you verbally. And I want to prove it to you verbally because it's really important that you understand this clearly. In order to get everyone to come out exactly the same, what do I have to do? What I have to do is I have to tax all those who earn above the average income. I have to tax them 100% of the excess. And I have to subsidize all those below the average income up to the average income. You follow me? That's the only way I can guarantee that everyone comes out exactly the same. I have to tax everyone above the average income 100% of the excess, and have to subsidize everyone below the average income up to the average income. Then and only then will everyone come out exactly the same. Now, if I actually did that, if I actually taxed everyone above the average income 100% of the excess, and if I actually subsidize everyone below the average income up to the average income, I will stipulate today, counselor, we'll all come out equal at zero income, period. What happens why does raising tax rates on the rich causes income inequality to go down? Is because what happens is they reduce the incomes reported by the rich substantially, and it destroys the economy, and everyone gets poor. Only the rich report less income faster than the poor fall out behind the battlefield. That's the only way you can achieve total equality of income in this world is if everyone earns zero. That is it. I hope you understand exactly what I'm talking about here. This is going to be the tax policies, I believe, of this administration. On spending, just very simply on spending, we need government. We desperately need government. I am not a government denier in any way, shape, or form, nor any of my friends that I know of. We need government. There are some things that government does way better than the private sector, and we need them. All right? I mean, defense, highways, education, they're just all sorts of wonderful oversight, judiciary. These are all really important aspects of government, and we need it. And any economy that doesn't have enough government is going to underperform. And you can see this all over the place where they lost control of governments. Haiti, just go to tell me how they do in Haiti. We need government, and we need good, effective government. But if you have too much government, you're going to hurt yourself too. What you want to do on government is you want to get it just right. When you look at government spending, what you want to do is when the benefit is done by the last dollar of taxes collected is a beep, 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 more than the damage done by the last dollar of taxes collected, you stop already. That's the right size of government. Anything larger than that is too large and will hurt the economy. Anything smaller than that will hurt the economy. Now, when you look at today's economy, you see we have federal government about 34.5%. That doesn't even count state and local, which is big ones in there too. All right. We are way higher than we ever were. In 1910, federal government spending as a share of GDP was somewhere between 2.5% and 3.5% of GDP. And we became the preeminent economic force on the planet Earth with a government that size. And it really did. Now, maybe it should have been a little larger, but we have government that's way too large today. What you want on tax is a low-rate, broad-based flat tax and you want spending restraint. The third area, which I'm just going to mention, is sound money. And we really do need sound money. What you want to do is have no inflation. It's just really important. In 1913, the federal government started nationalizing money in this America. Prior to that, money was private. We had private banks issuing currency. They were called banknotes back then and issued there. The government did play a role. It minted gold coins, and it defined a dollar as 1/20th of an ounce of gold. It defined a dollar as 1 ounce of silver. That's what it was. It also, by the way, did oversight of banks' balance sheets and income statements and their reported financials, which was really important. But in 1913, they started nationalizing healthcare. Then we went to the devaluation of the dollar under Roosevelt that I mentioned, the going off gold, making it illegal to hold gold on, voluntary foreign credit restraint, all the way up to the Smithsonian Accord, where we finally completely nationalized money in the system. In the 2.5 centuries prior to 1913, prices went up and down, they did. But the average rate of inflation was 0% over 2.5 centuries. Zero, average. From 1913 to the present, inflation has risen 69-fold, 6,900% increase since 1913. We have a real problem with money. There are ways of solving it, but I'm not going to talk about it. But that is the third. We need to find a way of getting sound money and a stable currency so we can function beautifully going forward. Regulations, I'm also not going to mention in any length, although I have healthcare with you. I'm also not going to mention the decontrol of oil and all these others, which will be done. That also is very important. But let me go to the last one, the one I really want to touch, because this is the high-powered, this is where the action is. It's trade. And I want to talk to you as an economist about trade. What are the benefits from trade? And there are two aspects of the benefits of trade. The first one is called comparative advantage, or the gains from trade, which is David Ricardo wrote about at a great length. We produce some products more efficiently than other countries do, and other countries produce some products more efficiently than we do. We and they would be foolish in the extreme if we didn't sell them those products we make more efficiently than they do, in exchange for those products they make more efficiently than we do. It's called a win-win, a gains from trade, comparative advantage, David Ricardo. This is the engine that created a lot of U.S. growth from the colonial days to the present. It's a huge, powerful force. The Kennedy round tariff negotiation, NAFTA, and the trade deals that Trump did in his first term are all movements in the realm of freer trade in the world. It's really, really a major source of growth. The second gains from trade come from the trade deficit, trade balance. Some countries that run trade surpluses, who export more than imports, and there are some countries that run trade deficits, they import more than they export. You know, when you import more than you export, foreigners buy assets in your country, you transfer capital. Imagine a machine in Japan, let's say in Hokkaido. This machine in Hokkaido is doing very poorly. It's got a negative rate of return. It's making losses year in, year out. It's doing very badly. If you go up there and pick up that machine in Hokkaido, take it down to Tokyo Harbor, load it onto a ship, send it over to San Francisco, offload that machine in San Francisco, send it up to Colorado, and put it into a factory there in Colorado. If this machine now is very productive and makes lots and lots of profits, it's a huge benefit for the planet. Moving capital from one country to another country is essential for economic growth. It really, really is. It's the second source of trade, of the gains from trade. It comes under the name of Sidney Alexander, who was the man who did a lot of work on this area there. Now, by taking that machine from Hokkaido down to Tokyo Harbor and loading it on a ship, that's called a Japanese export. That's called a Japanese trade surplus. By offloading that machine in San Francisco, that's called a U.S. import and a U.S. trade deficit. All right? And then that machine goes and is productive up in Colorado. But if you look at it, it's not only the U.S. trade deficit and the U.S. and the Japanese trade surplus that occurs, but the U.S. now has one machine more than it had before. and Japan has one machine less than it had before. The U.S. trade deficit is also the U.S. capital surplus. And the Japanese trade surplus is also the Japanese capital deficit. This is accounting. This is the way of how you transfer resources from savers to investors on a global scale. You know, from 1640 until 1870, the U.S. ran trade deficits each and every year. We built our country on foreign capital from Britain, from Holland, from those countries. We built it. Every single year we ran a trade deficit and a capital surplus, bringing those machines came to our shores where we had plenty of labor and plenty of natural resources, and we grew like Billy-O during that period. That's the period there. Now, we did have 7 years we had surpluses, and you might guess the years we had surpluses. Well, 1776 and 1777, for some reason, the British didn't want to trade with us. I don't know why. 1811, 1812, and 1813, they didn't want to trade with us then either. Aren't they mean little people, those British people? And then, of course, in 1840 and 1842, we had the big canal bond collapse, which also stopped trade. But those are the only 7 years. All the rest were trade deficits, capital surplus for the U.S., and this is why almost all economists are rabid fans of free trade. And we all are from the standpoint of economics. But now let's take a look at what goes on in trade. And I'm going to take you through a conversation I had with President Trump, a personal conversation. I was sitting in my living room with my flip phone, and this was in 2019, I think maybe early 2020 there. And he called and he wanted to talk to me about trade because I am a trade specialist. If any of you look at my first real big book was International Economics in an Integrated World. It's a textbook type of. And he said, Arthur, I want you to understand I'm a free trader. And I did. I've known him for a while, never well. I've never sat down and had a talk with him, but I've known him well, known him peripherally for quite many, many years. And so I said, sir, I know that. I know you're a free trader. Any CEO of an international organization has to be a free trader, and you were, and obviously you are. And I then made a statement that I shouldn't have made, but I did. I said, also, any person who imports 2 foreign wives has to be a free trader. He did not laugh, by the way. And he said, let me explain to you what my view is. And this is the view you're going to see and you're going to hear, and it's going to dominate your life. And it's already dominating it. When I look at the world, Arthur, I see all these countries who don't believe in free trade. Japan doesn't believe in free trade. South Korea doesn't. China doesn't. These other countries don't. The U.S. is the most free trade large country there is in the world. There are a couple little bitty countries like Hong Kong, like Monaco, or like the Jersey, Guernsey, and Sark, or like maybe the Isle of Man, or these who are freer trade than we are. But of big countries, we're the freest trade country by far. All of these countries are mercantilists. All they care about is access to the U.S. market. They want to sell more to us and buy less from us and hoard the gold for their surpluses. You remember how de Gaulle did with Kennedy on that. If any of you remember that, I'm probably the only one old enough to remember that. But, okay, these guys, how do I get them to see the truth of the benefits of free trade, the gains from trade? All they care about is access to the U.S. market. You know what I'm going to do, Arthur? I'm going to threaten them with prohibition of using the U.S. market. I'm going to threaten them with tariffs and big tariffs, 25%, 50%, 100%, 200%, until I can bring them to the negotiation table. And so we can sit down and negotiate free trade deals. This is exactly how Trump. Now, I am not a negotiator. I'm not a bargainer. I don't like conflicts. I roll up into a little ball. I start crying and wet my pants and climb under my bed. But Trump is a negotiator. And, he likes it. He really enjoys it. You saw what he did with Colombia the other day? You can't land your planes here. Okay, you can't export to the U.S. 25% tariff as tomorrow morning. And a week from now, it's 50% tariff. And by the way, all of your visas are revoked. Okay, we'll fly him out. Let me send the president. He knows how to. You're going to be seeing this type of movement here in the U.S. going forward. When you're looking at tax policy, which I take the transfer theorem and the redistribution, if you look at trade policies, you're going to see a very different world of this from my assessment of what's going on when I look at all of this together. I think you're going to be seeing a huge change in the U.S. economy, and all of it for the better is my view of the world. And I guess if I can end this conversation with, all right! Thank you. And I'm here for questions, so line up behind these people. I'm supposed to have you line up and do it in the microphone because this is being videoed. They want to hear my stupid retorts to your wonderful questions. So, and they want it on record so they can, bribe me or whatever they want to do.
We're going to be opening the floor for questions. So if you could walk around the back and then line up by my colleague over here, that would be awesome.
My name's Ray. Thank you, Dr. Laffer, for being here, and that was a great talk. My question is, my number one largest concern economically in the U.S., for the U.S., is the enormous debt and deficits that we have. This relates to tax and trade. $36 trillion national debt, $2 trillion annual deficits, $1 trillion a year in interest on that debt. My question is, what is the economic bad case scenario if this doesn't get fixed or reversed? Where do we go from here? What happens economically? Thank you.
Ross? Where are you, Ross? Oh, there you are. Could you give that person who asked that question the $10 I told you to give to the best question? I love that question because it fits right into my wheelhouse. When you look at debt, you cited 36 trillion, whatever it is. Some people say it's 130% of GDP, all of that. And, my hair starts hurting. I start watering my mouth. Let me start off by saying a lot of the debt measure that you're talking about, U.S. debt, is intragovernmental debt. It's the government owes it to itself. For example, the Fed's balance sheet is almost all U.S. Treasuries. That's counted in gross debt, but it's not net debt. You first place have to net out just the way companies do and look at net debt rather than total debt, okay? That's number one. Now, that still leaves you a big number. It leaves you about 105% of GDP. That's a big number. But then when you look at debt, and again, I'm just being an economist here and a business person. When I look at a company's balance sheet and its income statement and its cash flow, I never compare balance sheet items with income statements or cash flow statements. I never do. I never compare income or cash flow statements with balance sheet items. You never compare a stock with a flow or a flow with a stock. You always compare stocks with stocks or flows with flows. In this case, it is totally inappropriate to use debt as a share of GDP. If you want to look at a measure of debt, look at debt as a share of wealth. Well, when you do that, we have the Federal Reserve numbers on wealth, U.S. household net wealth. And if you look at that debt as a share of wealth, it's about 20%, which is too high. I don't disagree with you being high, but it's not jumping off the edge of the cliff. It's not panic time. It's not, oh my God, we'll never solve it. Oh, my children. No, stop already. If you want to look at it in flow to flow, you should look at debt service to GDP, and that is in the range of 3 or 4% of GDP. I don't know what the exact number is, but again, it's not way out of line and not something to panic about. Think about it when you buy a house. If you're a family and you buy a house, what are the two questions the bank asks you? What's the loan to value? Okay, what's your debt to your wealth? What's the value of the house and what's the loan on that house? And they look at loan to value, which is the right thing to do. That's a stock to a stock. Or can you afford this mortgage? What is your income and what is your debt service and can you afford it? Those are the two ways of looking at it. The same thing is true for the federal debt. You with me on that? But now then I want to go to the next thing with that on debt. And there are lots of others, but let me do the next one. Let me ask all of you today. I'm going to let you borrow all you want at 1% interest. And I'm going to let you invest all you want risk-free at 10% interest. How much would you borrow Everything
The
you can get your
maximum,
hands on.
The maximum.
100%, yes, all the way. Now, reverse those numbers. I'm going to let you borrow all you want at 10% unless you invest all you want at 1%. How much are you going to borrow?
Zero.
It's not the debt that's the issue. It's the spread. And it really is the spread. If you can borrow really low and invest really high in security and risk adjusted and all that stuff, do it. If you can borrow at very high interest rates and lend at very low, don't do it. All right? So when you look at debt and you look at deficits in there, make sure you put it in the correct economic terms. And it's the spread. When we took over in 1981, when God still loved America, the skies parted, the sun shone forth, and the fields turned green, the animals, they multiplied, and the trees blossomed and bore fruit, and the orphans were all adopted, and the enemies of America were taken offshore, and Ronald Reagan became president of the United States. We were faced with a horrible dilemma. We had just suffered through what was called the period of the Four Stooges: Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter. The largest assemblage of bipartisan ignorance ever put on planet Earth. All right? We failed a country that had been driven into the grounds by these yahoos, and they really had been. So we dug into the rubble and pulled out this platinum sort of little imprimatur and polished it, and we put it on the wall and it said, USA Inc., America. Okay? And then we looked at it and we borrowed lots and lots and lots of money. We did. I don't know if any of you saw the Reagan deficits. At least in those days, they looked large. They don't look large today, but they looked really large back then, okay? And what did we do with that money? We cut taxes dramatically. We deregulated the economy. We built up the defenses to secure our economy, and then we sat back and prayed to God it would work. And it did. We had the biggest boom ever. I mean, just through the ceiling. Debt to U.S. wealth dropped very sharply. We borrowed cheap, we lent, and we built America on debt. Compare that now with and by the way, I'm going to say this bipartisan because it's true. Clinton was great with that debt. We borrowed like mad. We built America up into this great big economy. Clinton comes into office. George H.W. Bush was a real mistake, but then we had Clinton come in and did just what he should do. He paid off the debt. Debt as a share of GDP fell sharply. I voted for Clinton twice, by the way. In fact, in my life, I've probably voted for more Democrats than I have Republicans. I was Jerry Brown's economist when he ran for president in 1992, just for the record. And we did that, and it worked perfectly. You know, then you came to Bush and W and Obama and Biden. And what did they do? They borrowed tons and tons of money and paid people not to work and paid them to stay home and not to do that. I mean, all the mistakes. Think of the spread. I hope I've made you feel a little bit better. You've got a president there today that's not going to be running. He's got Doge. You may not like Doge, and I don't know if I do or not yet, but we'll see. He wants to cut spending. He wants to do it. He wants to bring debt down as a share of GDP. He wants to control spending and cut taxes. I think it's going to work again, but I hope I've made you feel a little bit better about it. All right.
Thank you.
Oh, that was you. Did you like my joke? All right. Oh, you even do it with a swing. I like that. But see, you can't have the audience see the one going down. Sorry. By the way, make sure you get him the $10. Yeah. Did I not? I was waiting for that one, of course. Every place, I love answering that one. Yes.
Hi, thank you for speaking today. What are your thoughts on how K-12 education funding affects the economy of their future?
Yeah. You're talking about K through 12 funding of education?
Yes.
And junior colleges, universities?
Not included, just
Not just K through 12.
just to K-12.
What I think, and I do like school choice. If school choice were on the ballot, and if school choice were a bill in the legislature, and I were a member of the legislature, I'd vote for it. But my real preference on education is incentives. And I really think incentives are critical to put into education. And the way I'll just touch on it fairly quickly. I would like to see the 21st Century Excellence Awards. All those kids in the top 5% of the SAT scores, I'm using hypotheticals now, not real. You can design your own incentive structure. But the top 5%, give them $15,000 tax-free, no questions asked. The second 5%, give them $7,500, no questions asked. Nothing for anyone else. Make it highly skewed. towards excellence with big rewards for a very small group of people with excellence. Can you imagine what the kid coming home saying, Dad, I just missed the top 5% by one person. Get in here, son, Ben, you know. You'd have grandma doing tutorials like it would be Tiger Mom City in this country. And you would have everyone going there. Just the same way you see the inner cities in the U.S. today, you see people going in two forms. Why do all the athletes and everything come from the inner cities? Because that's the only way out. That's where you get the big bucks coming through. Incentives really matter, and you have to make them really hyper incentive. How do you get someone to pay $1 for 60 cents? Right? How do you get someone to do that? I'm going to sell you 60 cents. Would you pay? I'm selling it for $1. Would you buy it? No one will, unless you skew the incentives. Now go to a lottery. You get tons of people into lotteries. Why? Because you have a skewed incentive. What you want to do is have a very high reward for a very small group to really organize the whole structure around that. That's what I would do through K. In 21st Century Excellence Awards for students. Teachers who teach well should be paid more than teachers who don't teach well, by a lot. You know, you really should. It should not be one size fits all. You need incentives for school administrators whose bottom line dedication to excellence is illustrated by the performance of the schools they administer. They should be bonused like mad. All right? You know, you really want to hyper the incentive structure to get our educational system going. In addition to school choice, I do think parents make better choices than do government officials on schools and all that, but I really think the key here to good education is really structuring the incentive structure to make sure that K through 12, you really get the type of results you want in that. You follow me?
I'm following.
Okay, thank you very much for the question.
Thank you.
And I hope it was okay. Thank you.
Okay, this is going to be our last question.
Hi there.
Mr. Puma, how are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you. I'm like that horse heading towards that barn, so I'll ask a question.
So my name is Brian. In the context of the transfer theory, how does the redistribution of income from a higher to lower earnings lead to a decrease in overall economic?
How does the highest distribution? Because basically, if you take it from the rich, you reduce their incentives to produce. Taxes do reduce your incentives. These guys with taxes there, what do? They have plenty of money. They hire lawyers. They hire accountants. They hire deferred income specialists. They hire favor grabbers. They hire lobbyists. They hire politicians. When you see a group of people hanging around with the president, don't for a moment think that this is a group of street people trying to explain to the president what it's like being poor. It's not. These are people from Goldman Sachs who are working for government this term and devising schemes so when they go back and go to Goldman Sachs, they can sell those to their clients. These people have not only the ways, but they're rich. They have the means. They can hire all these people. They can change the composition of their income. They can change the volume of their income. They can change the location of their income. And they can change the timing of their income. I moved all the way from Rancho Santa Fe, California to Nashville, Tennessee in 2006. Guess why? Taxes, duh. If you have two locations, A and B, you raise taxes in B and you lower them in A, producers and manufacturers and people are going to move from to. I'm not going way over your heads, am I? If you tax rich people and you give the money to poor people, you're going to get lots and lots of poor people and no rich people. The dream in America has never been to make the rich poor. The dream in America has always been to make the poor rich. This is an opportunity of balancing up. Reagan said it time and time again. Never balance down, balance up. Make the poor richer. Don't make the rich poorer. That's the way. So this is how the theorem works on the transfer theorem. And if you tax rich people and try to give the money to poor people, everyone will ultimately lose out. And you can see the growth of the United States we've been in deep senescence now in this country for something like 25 years. It's been a long, long dry spell for the U.S. Believe me, we're in need of a real pop. And I think we're about to get it. But, you know, the U.S. is not alone on this. I mean, Britain has gotten so bad They decide to call their currency the ounce, not the pound. The EU is literally withering on the vine. Japan, did you realize that in 1989, Japan's market cap was the same as the US market cap? The Imperial Palace in Tokyo, the market value of the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was more than all of California combined. Look at where Japan is at. Where is Japan? I don't even remember. What is that? Was a country? I mean, have you seen what's happened to Japan in the last 25 years? It's been crazy down. Look what happened to Chile. Chile has gone up, and then it was the Vichas cylinder of South America. It's flipped over the new one. It's now heading straight south. Look what's happened to China from 1970 until 2020. Chinese grew real GDP per adult 66-fold. The U.S. during that period did it 3.5-fold. Now, under Xi and his recent policies, they've reversed all of the policies they've done, and China is on. You will not, I mean, I'm telling you guys this, but let me say, if you're worried about China, wait 10 years, there won't be a China. They will kill themselves, and they're doing it right up in front of our eyes. You're watching them commit suicide. You know, you look at all this stuff. What I really see here is a new period of growth and reformation and renaissance in the world led by the United States. Thank you very much, everybody.